This.
Yeah.
Well, looks like we're live. We can wait a couple of minutes here before we start blabbing away.
There will be no blabbing.
No blabbing. All very concise, short, informative answers. Well, we might as well dive in. Hello, everyone who's joining us. I am Matt Kettmann. I'm a senior editor at the Santa Barbara Independent, where I've worked for 20 plus years. A lot of that covering food and wine in Santa Barbara County. I'm also contributing editor for Wine Enthusiast magazine, where I review about 200 or so wines a month from the Central Coast, and a lot of those are coming from Santa Barbara County. If you haven't joined us before, this is the Rita Hills Wine Alliance's response to COVID. Essentially, we've been doing these virtual tasting sessions, like have become common across the industry, and we've done a bunch of them since June. I don't even want to go through the list because it's getting pretty long, but we've done a ton of them. And today on the show we have Sanford Winery. We have Trey Fletcher and Laura Roach, and they'll be talking about instead of having two guests this time, or two different wineries this time, we decided that Sanford had enough of a story to tell that we would have one, and we're going to be tasting some bubbles, which is great, and kind of a new project for Sanford. At least it's coming out. And we're going to talk about, of course, Sanford and Benedict Vineyard, which is where it all started when it comes to the Santa Rita Hills, and really when it comes to Pinot Noir in Santa Barbara County. So before we do that, I just want to mention that the next upcoming ones we're skipping next week, which would be Election Day. I didn't think we wanted to do one on that day. No matter your political beliefs, you might not be happy. And then on November 10th, we are doing kind of a Mount Carmel showcase. So we have Matt Dees, who makes wine for Mail Road, among other projects. He'll be pouring some of the Mount Carmel wines, and Brian Babcock, who goes back to the early days of Mount Carmel Vineyard, which is a really amazing spot in the middle of the Santa Rita Hills, right next to this crazy old monastery that I wrote about years ago. And we'll be checking those wines out. And then on November 17th, we're doing kind of an examination of newer estates, kind of built from scratch. So we have Peak Ranch is going to be part of that. And I'm actually not sure if Win Solomon, the winemaker, if John Wagner, the owner, is going to speak. I think it might be John. Maybe we'll get them both. And we're also going to have Ofer Sheffer from Spear Vineyard. So we're going to talk about, building new estates in the Santa Rita Hills, as this region has really matured, and what it's like to kind of break in. And we're going to taste some of those wines too. So if you want to get in on that and taste with us, I never know how many people are out there actually tasting wines with us. It'd be comforting to know that you are enjoying the wines with us, but I don't know how many actually are. We're enjoying the wines, so it'd be fun to have you along doing it as well. And if you want to get in on that, just look at the Facebook page for the Santa Rita Hills Wine Alliance, which is probably where all of you are watching this now, if you're watching it. And you can find out how to buy some of these wines in advance, and enjoy these wines with us. And then we post all of these shows, I guess they'd be, to the Santa Rita Hills Wine Alliance's website. So we're having a pretty cool archive of a lot of historical and interesting conversations that we've had. Some pretty even emotional, when we had Richard Sanford on and we're presenting him with the Winemaker of the Year award and that sort of thing. It was, there were tears shed. So that was pretty cool. For a virtual thing, it seemed like it still had some good meaning. So anyway, now we're going to dive into.
I'm a big crier, so
yeah, perfect. Okay, there's your cue. Yeah. So, like I said, today we are talking to Trey Fletcher, the winemaker at Sanford Winery, and Laura Roach, who is, your title is what, Laura? Is it associate or assistant? What is the right title for you?
Associate, but grunt winemaker.
Grunt winemaker. And so we're going to talk about 4 wines today. We've got this guy. This is always confusing to me to do this in non-mirror. Okay, so we have the 2015 Brut Cuvée, which we'll taste first. So if you're tasting at home, feel free to crack that one open and dive in. Pop that one open, I guess. Then we have the Brut Rosé from 2016. And then we're going to get into one of the newer bottlings from Sanford and Benedict, the 2017. And wow, it's like a new Zoom function there. And then we're gonna go. Did I cause that or someone else? Then we're gonna go to the 2011 and taste a little bit about what that historic vineyard does with some age in the bottle. So let's talk about sparkling. Laura, why don't we start with you? Let's hear a little bit about your background. And I know you also make your own sparkling wine under the Lou Bud label. So tell us about your background. And I'm pouring wine, that's why I'm not looking at the screen. Your background and how you started at Sanford, and how this whole sparkling project came about there. I mean, Sanford's been around forever, as we know, as far as Santa Barbara County wine history goes, but the sparkling is actually kind of a new thing. So explain all of that.
I'll try in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So my story really begins in Northern California. I grew up in Davis, and I decided to go to UC Davis, not knowing that there was an outstanding wine program. And just when I got in, my grandmother had recommended the wine program to me. And she had read an article about women in wine, and a lot of the people that the writer had been interviewing, a lot of their interests overlapped with mine, and she just put two and two together. I was studying the French culture. I love to cook. I love to bake, and chemistry was kind of my strong point. And so I trusted her. I took an introductory course, and I got the sensory professor as our introduction to enology at Davis my first quarter, and I absolutely loved it. And so I dived right in I think it was my sophomore year. I took off a quarter and I worked at Schramsberg, and I told them I was 19, but they kept forgetting. So I got to participate in a lot of tastings. And
they make primarily bubbles, basically, right?
Right. Yeah. So they have a separate label, J. Davies, which is Cabernet Sauvignon from their estate, but then they source from Carneros down to Carneros up to Anderson. And so it was a really great experience to work with a lot of different Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, picked way too early for still wine, but ideal for sparkling. And just kind of understanding these numbers, I was in the laboratory, so I felt like I was at the crux of all of this information. And I realized at that time that winemaking is made up of a lot of very small details and very critical ones for sparkling. The picking decision and the chemistry and the flavors. So everything in making a sparkling wine, I found is very exacerbated by the carbonation. So if you pick a little too early, it can just be very green and bitter. And we've made none of those mistakes at Sanford. So, yeah.
Pretty perfect winemaking.
And it seems to me that all the winemaking is a bit predictive, right? You're tasting fruit on the vine and you're trying to imagine what it's going to taste like. But it seems like when it comes to bubbles, it's even more predictive than anything, because you're pulling fruit off that is really indigestible to some extent before you make sparkling.
Right.
I don't know if I agree with that, because you're still someone very wise in the ways of making sparkling wine was like, don't forget that you're still making a wine, and it's not those things that you hear so much. I was surprised this year, how close our picking window was to the Chardonnay that we picked. So they're not as painful and joyless, I think.
But it's a quick picking window, because you're going from 90% veraison to veraison, and it's like the next day. And of course, this year we had a little bit of heat, like right at veraison. So that's always a little scary, especially when you're working with only so many blocks. But just going back to my background, it was sparkling wine from the get-go. And I finished up at Davis, and I realized I wanted to take some time off and work multiple internships around the world before I settled in one region, which I had no idea where that would be, but I knew I loved Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. That's what I love to drink, and sparkling. And so I actually ended up working in pretty warm regions in South Africa, in Paarl, and then also in Stellenbosch, and then up in Napa Valley working for Dalla Valle for Cab Franc. And I love the wines, but they weren't what I wanted to make. And so Santa Barbara County was in my radar, and I was very fortunate to land a job here as an enologist back in 2012, and I just saw so much potential for sparkling. I remember in my interview talking about sparkling nonstop, and like, why don't you make one? You have all the pieces, and they're like, oh, we just haven't gotten around to it yet. So I got around to it in 2013.
Yeah. And so it was 13 was the first year you made it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
didn't take you long to convince them.
No, I got bored really quickly in the lab. I cleaned everything up, and then I just wanted to research something that could that I could work on, and the whole team. And it just made sense to make a Brut Cuvée because we have excellent Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and we wanted to make one really good sparkling. And so we picked Pinot Noir and Chardonnay for sparkling, and this is, at that time, back in 13, it was, I think, the end of July. It was kind of an early harvest for us, and we were looking at a picking window between 18 to 19 bricks, and for anyone who's not a winemaker, that's pretty low for a wine that comes out to about 10.5 to 11% alcohol. Very high acidity. Sometimes I call it a little like battery acid quality, but it's not that bad. But it's
always a good tasting note.
Yeah.
We put that one on the back list.
It's intense.
But then the process is what mellows it out too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we go through malolactic fermentation, and that's really barrel by barrel. We're tasting and deciding if we want it to continue going through fermentation, and then sometimes it's spot on, and so we halt it. But so the Brut Cuvée is a blend of 70% Pinot Noir and 30% Chardonnay, 100% estate. We're definitely a grower sparkling. We are growing the fruit and picking purposefully from our 2 vineyards for these blends. And the Brut Cuvée went through partial malolactic fermentation. So that means a couple of the barrels went through, a couple we chose not to, and then put the whole blend together.
And tell, for people who don't, I think those of us who are well versed in the Santa Rita Hills understand why it's an ideal place for sparkling wine. But for those who don't, why is it such a perfect place? I mean, there's French people are coming here, champagne producers are coming here and investing in land to make sparkling out of the Santa Rita Hills. So what is so perfect about it for sparkling?
Yeah, it's, absolutely our climate, and we have cold nights almost every day, down into the 50s or 40s, like this morning, and then up into the 70s. So we have a huge diurnal change. And what that does to the fruit is we have a longer growing season. So because we go into dormancy around December, and then the vines are kind of awakening in the spring, and they come out of dormancy a little bit earlier, and our picking window is pushed back a little bit. So we have a longer hang time, which allows for a little bit more fruit. And the cold nights are what really lock in the acidity, which is what you want in a balanced sparkling wine. You want something to pair with those really delicious fatty cheeses, and it just cuts right through. And that's what allows a sparkling to age, is having a Chardonnay and a Pinot Noir with body and with elegance, and and just nice finesse.
Yeah, we shouldn't look past the soil. I think it's fairly rare in California and on the West Coast, which primarily have acidic soils because they used to be the forest at one point. And down here in the Santa Rita Hills, we have soils that are very high in pH. I think as the saying goes, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in basic soils, and Gamay in acid soils. And although there's lots of fantastic wines that come from those soils, I mean, we know this. I think you can't count out the soils, and those soils with the higher pH in conjunction with the cooler days. I mean, the wines, it's a natural setting for sparkling wines. If you go up into like a Napa or some of the warmer parts of Sonoma, I mean, you're really fighting nature in a lot of those places to make a sparkling wine. And here it comes almost effortlessly.
Yeah. It's very like focused. All of our wines have a very clear focus, very citrus driven. And then there's just this natural texture, which basic soils and also very heavy soils. That's what we have here in the southern part of Rita Hills.
Right. And are these grapes from both La Rinconada and Sanford and Benedict, or are they from one or the other?
Yeah, it's a blend of both. So we're working with the Chardonnay's coming from La Rinconada. So just to the south of the tasting room as you drive into La Rinconada Ranch, the Pinot Noir is coming from two different parcels, one from La Rinconada, which you pass on your way in to the tasting room. It's on the right-hand side. It's a clone 23, which is a sparkling clone, which we realized and had to go with it. It didn't really have a home until now. And another block at Sanford and Benedict that was planted in 2010. So it's three different clones.
And has the program grown much? I mean, we can move to the Brut Rosé now too. Obviously, you're making more than the Brut Cuvée. What is the scope of the bubbles now?
Yeah, so the Brut Cuvée is always our flagship sparkling. I think that it encompasses what both ranches have to offer in both varieties, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And then we have our smaller select kind of wine club only sparklings, which the Brut Rosé kind of falls in that pocket because it's only 100 cases. So in total, we're making about 400 to 600 cases a year, but it's spread out over a few years. It's kind of hard to place it on a timeline in a sense because sparkling wine ages so beautifully on crown cap. They were able to use that age and bottle to just make it even a little bit more toasted and honeycomb. So the Brut Cuvée, and speaking of aging, so both of these wines are traditional methods. So they are bottle fermented and aged on the lees. The Brut Cuvée aged for 2.5 years, 32 months. And the Brut Rosé is a little bit more youthful, and it aged for 20 months.
Can you pour some of the Brut?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, you look really thirsty.
Trey, we'll get into your longer background in a few minutes, but have you overseen sparkling wine before?
No, never, which is why I'm so excited because coming here to Sanford with Laura, who's a total pro, and I've drunk large amounts of grower champagne and champagne, and always like, I saw these small producers coming from France and working with American producers together in conjunction. And then, as Laura says, this is kind of the first wave of real serious sparkling wine in Santa Barbara. And it's really fun to be a part of, but no, I've never made it before.
I'm still learning myself.
No, you're very good.
Vineyards behind us, and that's what really pushes us forward, and it's super exciting to be part of the Santa Barbara County wave of sparkling producers.
Yeah, and Laura,
take it pretty seriously though. I mean, it's not like play. I mean, when we started on it, it was kind of like, okay, if we're going to do this, let's do it for real. And we want to make something that's really, really dedicated to the site and that really shows the potential. This is not like a fluffy project. So which makes it, so much more fun to pour all that energy into with Laura.
There's a lot of planning with sparkling.
Yeah.
And how have you honed the focus over the years? I mean, I think people might understand how you with Pinot, maybe you're messing with whole cluster or less whole cluster. What are kind of some of the steps you can take in sparkling to emphasize aspects you like or de-emphasize ones you don't?
Yeah.
Is it all pick time or?
Pick time is definitely a big one. Yeah. We have a kind of a finer window when we want to pick. And so there's definitely that. And with Pinot Noir, you're definitely getting a little bit more richness to a later pick, but you really want to keep the sugar low enough that your alcohol isn't above 11%. It's very difficult to get the secondary fermentation to complete in bottle past that. So, that would be testing the limits there. So you really only have so much play there. But then how you ferment, temperature-wise, I think that was just such an eye-opening thing for me with Chardonnay this year. It's playing with the temperatures of fermentation and what we're getting, but similarly with sparkling. And all of our sparklings, the 15s and the 16s that we're tasting, were tank fermented and then barrel aged. And this year we did a lot more barrel fermentation. So I'm really excited to learn from that. And then from there, it's how long you're aging on oak or stainless steel. If you're doing a non-vintage, we don't have
so many variables.
Yeah. But we don't have a non-vintage that potentially could be something in the future. Right now, I really like focusing on the vintage because we're fortunate that, knock on wood, every vintage so far we've had really great years for sparkling. I know that can be difficult in Champagne, and they just don't always have the ideal weather for producing a vintage sparkling. And I feel like California has a little bit more luck there.
Right. And so now you make the Brut Rosé. So the Brut Cuvée is your flagship. You have the Brut Rosé, then you have a Blanc de Noirs. Do you have a Blanc de Blancs as well? Or okay.
Yeah. Right now in our tasting room, we have the 2014 Blanc de Noir, and let's see, what is this? We'll be disgorging our Blanc de Blanc in the springtime, so that'll be released in the fall next year, 2021. So that'll be our first release of the Blanc de Blanc. But we've bottled 4 different sparklings over the past few years.
Yeah. And then through your personal project, Lubud, I assume you're learning some different aspects through that as well, too, of sparkling.
Yeah, marketing. It's really Instagram.
Yeah, right.
No. It's challenging. There's a lot of risk involved, and I take every wine that we make seriously, and it's I have to embrace the cold, the fact that we live in a cool region, but that we're going to be making wines in a cold room, disgorging, and at corking time. So there's some give and take with it, but I really love celebrating, and I think that's the main reason for doing it.
I imagine. I mean, these are is the 2015 the current release, and the 16 the Rosé the current releases right now? So is there any there's always there's a lot of patience in winemaking, obviously, but Bubbly puts that on a different level, especially if you're doing it in this way. It puts it on a different level. Are you just like
at 24 months
anxious, or
I have to forget about it?
Yeah.
I have to be excited about our next release and the wines that we have in barrel, and kind of not forget about the wines that are sitting in bottle. We definitely go back and we taste them and see what's coming to get ourselves prepared for just how it's aging, and deciding on when the best release time is. But it's super exciting. It's kind of like this hidden treasure and hidden secret, because the outside world doesn't know about it until 4 years down the line, and we've had it planned out for many years.
Right. And so this year, when you picked, did you went for the Rosé, the Cuvée, and Blancs, the Noir and Blanc? Anything else?
That's it.
That's enough.
That's enough.
Yeah, just under 700 cases. But that'll be spread out over many, many years. And the Brut Rosé from 2020 will be the first release of those 4.
And
they're all kind of going through ML right now. We did kind of our first tasting last week, and it was really fun to go through, because it was kind of like, okay, these lots are going through ML already. Do we want to stop this? Do we want to let this go? This fermented in a stainless steel tank. This was barrel fermented, and it's fun because you can already see the potential of the wines now. And we had a good sparkling harvest, so it was good.
Right, and I assume your fans were pretty. I mean, your customers were into it out of the gates, into sparkling in general.
Yes, yes. I think that it did take about a year for people to know that we had a sparkling, and maybe even still people are learning about it, because Sanford is known as a Pinot Noir and Chardonnay house, and so it's a great surprise, coming into the tasting room, and we've opened up the option as a sparkling wine club, and I know that that's caught on pretty well, and yeah.
Who doesn't like bubbles?
No one's gotten
Exactly.
upset.
Yeah, and if you're a Pinot and Chardonnay house, I mean, sparkling is just kind of like the exciting electric sister, right? So
Yeah. Make sure she's invited.
make sure she's invited.
Super PC.
Cool. Great. Well, these are tasty, and I'm excited to let people know about them, and I'm sure they're only getting better with experience too. So it's a really exciting project you guys have going on.
Thank you.
Yeah, what do you see, Matt, when you're tasting the Brut Cuvée and the Rosé? Because they're very different wines, but I think they do have a lot of the signatures of this area. Kind of what's sort of your perspective and what you've seen?
In these particular wines, I actually I tasted them blind earlier today, just to for review purposes actually, and I thought I liked them both. They're solid wines. I thought I was pretty blown away because it was in another flight too. I thought the 15 Brut Cuvée really stood out. I thought that there was a ton of like floral, really approachable stuff on the nose, and then it carried through. There was something you don't often get with sparkling wine. I mean, you always get a texture with sparkling wine because there's bubbles, like it's but there was a texture to the actual base wine that was apparent, which is I think a good thing. Anytime you get grip on a white or a red wine, and it's like more compelling in the mouth, and this one had the bubbles, and that was kind of the note I took, was like, the grip is apparent through the bubbles, which is not something I commonly see. So I thought that was kind of a really unique thing. The Brut Rosé I liked a lot, kind of a more pleasurable, fun, sunny day wine, I think. But the Brut Cuvée, I was pretty impressed. It was a little bit more of an intellectual, wine to think about and to consider.
Yeah, and it's fun what you say about the texture, because Santa Rita Hills is known for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay for having really textural wines. Lots of phenolic, lots of tannin in both of those varietals. And when we're tasting the Van Clairs, it's so interesting to see the same block of Pinot Noir, two different picks, and one has so much more structure to it. And this is, it's picked at 18 bricks, very high acidity, no skin contact at all, and it just has incredible texture out the gate.
One day later, same block.
Yeah.
Huh. And that's just because those tannins hang on better when it's less ripe or something, or?
Well, there's just that's the amount of tannin, the amount of phenolic that's in the skin. I think part of it's the site, right? This site, Sanford and Benedict and La Rinconada give immeasurable amounts of tannin if you're not careful. And it was just so interesting to see that from a very quick and very gentle pressing, you still get that tannin extraction into the wine, even though it's almost got no contact at all with the skins.
Right.
It's fascinating. If time permits and we don't have them bottled, you should taste the Van Clair. It's really really clear.
I'd like to, because I may have tasted some over time, but not many that are stuck in my memory. So it would be helpful for me in general just to understand I get the process, I understand the steps, but to see what you guys are tasting at that time, because you get to a sparkling wine, and whether it's delicious or you don't like it, you almost don't even know what it tasted like at some point in the process, because the bubbles are there, they're kind of clouding your perception for better or worse. So it'd be fun to kind of come check that out. So
yeah,
I'll have my scheduler contact you.
Yeah,
I love it.
Cool. Well, let's go. Let's move on to some red wine here. Some Pinot Noir from Sanford and Benedict. Let's start. I always like to start younger and then get to the older one. So let's start with the 2017 S&B. And Trey, before we get into the wine and the site, tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, I met you when you were at your last appointment, your first one in Santa Barbara County at Biennacido Vineyard, another iconic, vineyard of this county. So tell us about your background and how you made your way down to Santa Barbara and how you made your way to Sanford.
Yeah, I was really lucky. I think I've said this to you before. Biennacido really brought me down to Santa Barbara County, and Sanford and Benedict and La Rinconada kept me here. And so yeah, I was at Biennacido. I was the winemaker and general manager there from 2011 until 2019. And so I've been here working with Laura for just over a year now. But before that, I was up in Sonoma Coast, Literai, and a small family Pinot Noir and Chardonnay producer up there, and a biodynamic farmer. But actually grew up in San Diego, not known for its fine wine AVAs. We actually spent more time.
They actually have some interesting stuff happening right now, but yeah.
Which it's time, because the soils down there are fantastic, and the wines in the Guadalupe Valley are just when they're done well, they're done as well as anywhere. And but my dad was a plumber, and my mom had a small tax business, so not a famous wine family, but they were very Eurocentric. When my dad got out of Vietnam and he married my mom in '69, they went around all over Europe for a very long time, in Germany and in Burgundy especially, and tasted wines. And so we grew up with wines in the house. And when I grew up working with my dad, we would be repairing some pipeline in a trench or something like that, or doing some horrible plumbing job. And we would, stop the day and we would go sit down and have a nice lunch with wine at some, moderately fancy place. And then we would go back to work. And I just kind of thought that was normal. And, it just turned out my dad really liked to work hard and really liked to enjoy fine wine and food. And I just grew up in that household. And was really an immature, young 17-year-old, and just had this epiphany one day: someone's got to grow the grapes and make the wine. Why can't it be me? And so after high school, some family friends put me in touch with some friends of theirs in Switzerland. And so I moved to Switzerland after high school to learn how to grow grapes and make wine. It's not the most famous wine growing country in Europe, but it's got fantastic wines. We were just over the hill from France, just up the river, just up the lake, actually, from Geneva, in between Germany and Italy and France.
I've had some fantastic Swiss Pinot at World of Pinot Noir. I mean, it's fascinating. And then Chasselas, or however you say that, is also
Chasselas. Yeah, Chasselas is wonderful. I spent a lot of hours in the vineyard, shoot positioning Chasselas, which it's known for these tendrils that can just hold on to a trellis wire like nobody's business. And so it was great working these steep vineyards and working in the cellar in the afternoon when it got hot, and learning French and being a total, a newbie, and kind of learning that European model and mentality, and having the vineyard and the winery be completely inseparable. And so moved back to California and got a job in Napa, and worked in Napa, and realized that I should go study enology and viticulture. And I did that at Fresno State, a great rival to UC Davis. And
so Switzerland, San Diego, Switzerland, Napa, Fresno.
Yeah. It was a culture shock. I'd never been to Fresno. And I remember riding my beach cruiser to class that first heat wave in August, and I thought my forehead was going to rip off. It was like 110 degrees in the shade. But it was a fantastic program, and I was one of the youngest students there. A lot of the students there were master's students or post-baccalaureate. And it was really hands-on, like most CSUs compared to UC Davis, less research and more learn by doing, which really worked well for me. And then
4 years, you had to do all your GEs and everything too.
Oh yeah, so got my Bachelor of Science. Yeah, no, it had such an inferiority complex to UC Davis. They made sure that it had more units than the engineering department. So it was the highest units degree at Fresno State, and you wound up with a minor in chemistry, and just going with all these pre-med students. Oh, but well worth it, and it weeded out the riffraff. But after that, took a job down in New Zealand for about a year for Clos Henri, which was just establishing their vineyard and their wine program down there in Marlborough, which was started by the Henri Bourgeois family out of Sancerre. And then left there. I couldn't stand another winter in New Zealand. It was so cold. Every time the wind blew off Antarctica, it just took a little bit of my soul with it. And so then went down to Argentina and started the harvest in the north of Argentina in Salta province in Cafayate. And then worked my way down to Mendoza, bouncing around all these different Michel Rolland properties with some good family friends that I don't see enough of. And then came back to the U.S. and here I am.
And then, so you landed in Sonoma, did your time at Literai, and then came down.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So when did you said you came to Bienacido in 11, 12?
Yeah. I came in 2011, and I really had sort of a jaded view of Santa Barbara County wines. I'd had a lot of the bigger, blousier, really rich, over the top wines from the early aughts. And with the exception of a few wines from Au Bon Climat and from Ojai, and I'd had these wines from the early 90s, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, that had just aged beautifully at World of Pinot Noir at the Palais that they used to hold out there, and couldn't believe it. Was really blown away by Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs that just aged like the great wines that you have from all over the world. And so I knew that Bienacido and Sanford and Benedict were older vineyards, older Pinot Noir vineyards than almost anything up in Sonoma, could make age-worthy wines, which for me was really attractive. And when working at Literai, it was like, hey, here's the best of the Sonoma Coast and the Anderson Valley. Where do you want to go next? And Bienacido at the time still had a lot of the old vines planted in '73, but I always looked really covetously at Sanford and Benedict and La Rinconada and the old vines planted in '71. And was really, really lucky and really happy to meet John Terlato and his passion for Sanford and for the team here and what they've done, and the Terlato family's investment in the vineyards and replanting some of the sections and making sure that the old vines have many years ahead of them was too good to pass up.
And John, I've talked to John before, and he's like super deeply intrigued by Burgundy and has lots of friends there and likes to do tastings that I think I'm going to be invited to one of these days. So
you're invited.
Obviously his investment in the vineyard and his attention to classic style is probably pretty appealing as well, I imagine.
Yeah, I think we inherited a vineyard that Richard Sanford and Michael Benedict purposefully planted with a very long-term vision, and lucky enough, the Terlatos came in and purchased it and had the wherewithal and the desire and really the know-how to reinvest in the vineyard and make sure we had a long-term viable vineyard that was going into the future. I mean, it's so hard to find a place that has a great team and a great winery and a great vineyard and a great family behind it that can invest in it, that gets wine. Working for another, I was very successful doctor on the East Coast, and now I want to make the world's greatest Pinot Noir. It's not very interesting if they don't understand farming and they think that a 5-year plan is very long when 5 years could be your first vintage. So,
right.
So really
tell us, while we're sipping on the 2017, tell us a little bit about what makes Sanford and Benedict so special, not just because of its historic value to the region, but they picked a really good site. I mean, even with all the modern science, like they found a pretty good site back in 1971 or whenever it was.
Yeah, it wasn't blind luck. I mean, it was a lot of it was Michael Benedict, finding these old vines out on the Channel Islands that had been planted in the late 1800s, and realizing that this temperature, this climate here in Santa Rita Hills wasn't too cold for wine. And then literally, putting a lot of miles on pavement, driving around Santa Barbara County, looking for a place that was cool, with the thermometer out the window, and he and Richard Sanford, taking the time to plant what turned out to be a unique spot in a unique valley. And so Santa Rita Hills has, fantastic soils. We have everything from clay to river cobble, diatomaceous earth, but we also have tremendous amounts of shale and chert here at Sanford and Benedict and at La Rinconada. And that's because in addition to this climate and this really unique valley, there was a massive landslide from the mountain that's at the back of our property. And that opened up and unearthed in a really cataclysmic event about 11,000 years ago. These fantastic soils that are available to us and are very unique in the valley itself. Everyone else has got the beautiful soils on top of the mountains, but we got the heart. And Michael Benedict noticed that right away. He's a very sharp botanist from previous life, and he and Richard, really found success almost off of their first vintage. We've had a few of those wines from the Sanford and Benedict winery from those early vintages in the 70s, and I know they're really incredible. And
I've had some. They're amazing. Is that what is? I know you guys have some kind of critical springs on the property too that give out pure water that you can use. Is that, were those cracked by that event too? That geologic event probably.
Yeah. So California formed roughly 30 million years ago, at least the part that we're in. And we're in this transverse range, right? That allows, when Bakersfield heats up east of us, and it pulls the cold air over us all day. But in addition to that, this mountain had these two springs underneath it, these freshwater springs that still run to this day. And at some point, those springs basically undercut the mountain. And that's what created this big landslide that we, 10,000 years later, planted the vineyard on top of. And so when you come out here, it's really fantastic, the amount of shale and big pieces. We have lots of gravel, but we also have huge big pieces of shale and chert and very high organic material in the soil, and really fantastic soils for growing grapes in, that were unearthed by that landslide so many years ago. It's really
so how does that
to be dry farm.
Yeah. So sorry, go ahead. It's dry. It's mostly dry farm.
Slow internet out here. Yeah, it was allowed to be dry farm for the first, I think 10 or 15 years, and something that we, aren't dogmatic about certainly, but we were allowed to do in 2019 because of the rainfall, and we're doing fairly successfully this year until we had the first of 3 heat events in 2020.
Yeah. So how do those rocks, the shale and the soils, how does that translate to this particular wine and the Pinots in general? What is your sense of the impact of that kind of soil structure on the resulting wine?
Yeah, so the parent material, if you will, of our soils are these shales and chert and with a clay loam around it, and so it makes for a pH that's either slightly basic or neutral. So a lot of the nutrients that a vineyard can struggle for are readily available. That combined with just the organic matter allows for very loose soils. You can go out in August, as we have, and dig down 6, 8, 10 feet, and the soil is still very loose there. So those two combinations of the nutrient availability because of the soil structure, and then also the organic matter and the rocks in general, allowing the soil to be nice and loose, allows the roots to get down very deep to help mine for those nutrients and for the water, and for that exchange to help influence the physiology of the vine, and that coupled with the marine weather change the flavors and give us kind of that unique character that we think of as Sanford and Benedict, which is very earthy.
There's a density that I find just naturally to our Pinot Noirs here on the, I call it the southern corridor of Santa Rita Hills, because we're on that south end of the Santa Rita Hills. And there's a darker color. Sometimes, dark fruits, red fruits interplay, a lot of cranberry, but just some weight to it, just naturally.
And I often can, I wouldn't subject myself to this challenge publicly by any means, but I often can taste, because you guys sell some fruit, a good amount of fruit too, to a variety of winemakers, and I can often pull out an S&B in a blind lineup, because there is this, to me, like this earthier character, and a lot of Pinot I taste has a great earthy quality, but there's this kind of telltale earthy character, almost like a rocky character. It just makes me think that it's because those roots are so deep. It's because they're so accessible to grabbing that. And I know there's not like a lot of science to back that up necessarily, but there's a lot of, sensory sensations that I get that I can pull that out with, different winemakers making wine in different styles, and you can still kind of tell there's an S&B hallmark to the wines, which I always think is fascinating.
Absolutely.
It is fascinating. And we have science degrees, but we're not scientists. We're farmers and
artists.
Yeah. and we make the wine every year, and you've tasted the wine from several producers. And there is something very unique about these two sites that comes through in the wine year in and year out, regardless of the vintage and regardless of the producer. And that's a lot of why we're here. And because also it's very good. And I was trying to put my finger on it, and we are always, it's this elusive thing that you're trying to identify and to figure out. And, there's just a very comforting warmth to the wines from Sanford and Benedict. There's beautiful elegance, very fine tannins, but there's almost, it is a wet rock, forest floor, let's go mushroom hunting kind of weather aroma that you get in all the positive aspects. Yeah. I love S&B for it. It's very beetroot, very, very chanterelle, very, very, very forest floor.
Great. Well, let's take that with some age on it, I guess. So let's try the 2011. A little slightly more complicated label. Now you guys have cleaned it up a little bit in recent years.
Yeah.
So let's taste this wine and talk about it a little bit. Tell me about, both of you guys, like your age, the ageability of Sanford and Benedict Vineyard in particular seems pretty impressive and consistent and reliable.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to be intention. It would be a real shame to make wines off of this vineyard and just, not really push the fact that it can age really well. Let's do some things in the vineyard and the winery and have the wherewithal to let that shine, instead of, perhaps picking it too late or pushing it too much in the vineyard, or exposing the fruit too much to ripen it too quickly. And, doing all of those subtle things along the path of growing it and élevage and intention. It would be a shame to not make wines that aged off this vineyard. I love the 11. I think, it was such a cold vintage. It was really a vintage that I think changed California. What do you see? Because after 11, I think everyone learned they didn't need to pick super late to get a lot of ripeness and a lot of richness and a lot of terroir expression in their wines.
So it was a funny vintage for me because I had written for Wine Spectator for a number of years, about 04 till 14, and then Wine Enthusiast hired me to actually be a critic. I had never been a critic before that, and so I started in March of 14, right when all of these 2011 wines, not Santa Barbara wines, but the Napa wines to some extent, and different wines, were getting kind of panned by Wine Spectator and other publications as being kind of underripe and all this. But then I started getting some of the first ones I tasted were these 2011s. And granted, they might have had a little bit more bottle age than some of the earlier critics were tasting. But I was tasting the 2011s and I'm going like, these are amazing wines. Yeah. So I was kind of like, started to learn like maybe bottle age means something, especially for cooler vintages. And also what happens in Santa Barbara is not anything like necessarily what happens in the North Coast. So I've come to think 2011 is one of the best vintages of the last 20 to 30 years, really, because it was so cool. I'm also a fan of cooler climate wines in general, as I think many people are once they start tasting lots of wines and get a little bit more experience in their palates. You kind of start to lean towards more savory expressions of wine. But yeah, I think it has all the texture and interesting, roasted characteristics. And I don't know, it's just this is the first time I've tasted. I didn't even taste it before this, and it's bringing me back to what I liked about that vintage. So
it's been a while for us as well.
Yeah.
To go back and taste the library, Sanford and Benedict. It's pretty special.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about how neat this blend is because it's 100% the old vines, a blend of different clones that were initially established back in 81, 82, and then the 17 has some of the younger plantings that we really, really love. So they're slightly different blends, but then there's like one standout block between the two.
Yeah, and it's fun to see the constant between the two wines is the old vines planted in 71. And that's basically a quarter of the blend. And both of these wines were made with that intention of sort of making sure we're getting the soil types of Sanford and Benedict and these different parts of Sanford and Benedict, because there's a lower section with smaller, more gravelly soils. There's a higher section, and then there's almost a shoulder that reaches over towards La Rinconada that has bigger rocks and a little more chert, and the soils are a little lighter, a little less clay over there. And it's fun to see, the savory characters that you see in the 17 really highlighted in this, almost jumping out of the glass. But also it's very suave, it's very elegant, it's very round. It's much more of a lake than a stream when you're tasting it. It stays with you. It's really nice. I love it.
And you think that aspect is like a function of age, the broadness, or you think it was like that from the get-go?
It seems like it was like that from the get-go. It seems like it had that richness and that roundness to it, and I think that's something that's very S&B. Whereas La Rinconada Pinot Noirs are very, very, they're going somewhere. They're very linear. They're very focused, and they're very straight.
Very structure.
Yeah. Whereas Sanford and Benedict is always very round, and it's very suave, and it's very velvety.
Right.
I always think of Sanford and Benedict as more of our feminine blend, and La Rinconada just a little more masculine.
Yeah. So Trey, you've come into this historic winery, this historic vineyard. They've been making pretty good wine for a long time. What's your plan to what do you want to do with this newish job? I mean, this is your second vintage, essentially, 2020.
Yeah.
And I obviously, I mean, the 2019, the stuff I've tasted in 2019, not from you guys necessarily, but from the early releases I'm getting, 2019 tastes like one of the best vintages I've ever tasted in my life. And so that's a good time for you to come in. But what are you trying to, what would you like to do with your role, I guess?
Yeah, I think we've really taken a little bit more of a focus on the sites, and I think having an intention from day one and working a lot more upstream with the Chardonnays and the Pinot Noirs from both sites. We make all the wines our estate, so Santa Rita Hills, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, all the way up to our block designates. And just making sure that those wines are of the site and that they're, very pleasurable, but that they age really well. And so what we're doing along those lines, and what Laura and the team were doing here before I got here, and turning the ship, so to speak, was dialing back the new oak, really focusing on the coopers in the cellar. Really focusing on irrigation in the vineyard and crop load, and making sure that those two things are very balanced. Also, making adjustments in which vineyard blocks are coming into the winery. We have a tremendous amount of old vines, which is just lovely to play with. But it's fun to see, Sanford and Benedict's past, and then look at the future. Those plantings are starting to mature a little bit more, and so figuring out how those are coming along and how those kind of play in the cellar. Once we see them and once we see what they're really showing us. I think all of those things coupled with more gentle practices in the cellar. And then a little more strategic aging, a little more focus on the élevage, and really putting all the work on the vineyard manager, Eric Malia, so that we have to touch it a lot less in the cellar, to sum it up. But I mean, I don't think I came here to sit back and not try and make the best wines that are coming off of this property. That's absolutely my goal. And I think what Michael Benedict and Richard Sanford and all the people that came before me have done, I certainly want to honor all the hard work that they've put in. And I want to make wines that make this site proud, and that Santa Barbara can take their original winery for Pinot Noir and really have something that's high up on the mantle, that really shows what we can do and what we have been doing since day one.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, knowing your work from Biennacido and Laura, your work on the sparkling wines, I think you guys are off to a phenomenal start, and it seems like a great future. Trey, do you miss making Cool Climate Syrah?
Oh my God, so much. Santa Rita Hills is it's so different for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. It's such a pleasure to have such a different beast to work with in the vineyard and in the cellar. But I do miss the Syrah.
Harvest is quicker.
Well, I didn't pick
maybe
the Syrah
earlier now with sparkling. I make up for it.
But no, I think Matt. I mean, you talk with winemakers all the time. I mean, everybody loves making and selling and drinking. Well, maybe not selling, making and drinking Syrah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Selling, I hear a different story, but yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great, Laura and Trey. I think we've covered as much as we need to. We can let our viewers get back to the Dodgers game, and as a Giants fan, I can't root for them, but it might be their year. I was talking to Bob Lindquist the other day, and he's a huge Dodger fan, and
huge.
I had to admit it might be their year, but we might see tonight. So anyway, well, thank you for joining us on the Santa Rita Hills Wine Alliance tasting series. We don't really have a branded name for this thing, but we have another one coming up November 10th with Mount Carmel Showcase with Mail Road and Babcock. And then November 17th, we're going to talk to, I think, John Wagner from Peak Ranch and Ofer Sheffer from Spear Vineyard about what it's like to develop a new vineyard and winery in the Santa Rita Hills as it matures. So thank you all for joining us. Trey and Laura, really nice to see you virtually. Hopefully see you in person one of these days soon. And these wines are fantastic, and I look forward to drinking them the rest of the night, maybe with some food, especially at 11.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Matt. Take care.
You, Matt.
All right. Cheers, guys. See you.
Bye.
Cheers.